السلام عليكم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. First, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to be here today. I lived in California for a year in 2016, and I know how many events are always happening every weekend. So it's an honor to be in your presence. I think one of the reasons that we're all here is because we care. We care deeply about the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Gaza. But I also think another reason that we chose to spend our Sunday evening together is because we are all in such deep need for community. I think that a lot of us are going through this genocide, watching it and feeling very, very isolated, feeling like, is the whole world not seeing what we're seeing? And so it becomes very important for us to gather and let each other know that the grief and heartbreak and rage that we are feeling means that we're human, means that we have eyes that see and a heart that can feel, where we don't feel isolated in our insight. We don't feel isolated in the sense of outrage that we have. And that is very, very important. It's very important that you seek out others who are feeling the same way you are. Because so many people, I think, are kind of just going on with their lives, not even noticing. So we are here to recognize the beauty and resilience of the Palestinian people, even in the face of unparalleled brutality. And we're also here to gain inspiration from their example, not just to see them as victims, which of course they are, but to see them as light, of examples of light that we can draw strength from, not just give to. Because this genocide has exposed and divided humanity, but not along the lines that we've been told. Because it hasn't been along national boundaries. This genocide has not divided people along the normal national boundaries that you might expect. You have countries like Spain and South Africa who have said that they would recognize Palestine as a state, and at the same time you have countries that will remain unnamed who share our faith and even the Palestinian ethnicity and language, who have normalized with those who are destroying Palestine. And it hasn't been along religious lines as we are supposed to believe, because if you look across our country, you have young Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and every other faith and no faith bound together, protesting this genocide, risking expulsion, risking harassment by the police, and even sometimes physical harm, losing opportunities to say no to this genocide. And there is no differentiation in those encampments between faith. And the surprise is it's not even along partisan lines. For the most case, the majority of Democrats and even the majority of Republicans, when asked on surveys, say that they support a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And yet we had a war criminal address our Congress in a joint session of Congress and receive the kind of treatment that we see on TV given to dictators in North Korea by their own lackeys and cronies and sycophants in their own parliament, where every time he opens his mouth, they stand up and clap like clowns, like puppets. It was the most embarrassing display of self-humiliation that I think I have ever seen, and contrasted with the beautiful dignity and izzah of the Palestinian people. This is truly the side-by-side that I looked at. These ridiculous members of Congress standing up for a war criminal and clapping for him more than 50 times in the span of 60 minutes. And on the other side, the dignity of the Palestinian people in the face of so much cruelty. But at the same time, broken clocks. They say that broken clocks are right twice a day. And it's true, because he did say one thing I agree with in his ridiculous speech. And that is, he said that the war in Gaza is a clash between, quote, barbarism and civilization. I could not agree more. Because everyone from the Pope to the International Court of Justice stands with Palestine. Every human rights organization, every court of international law, every human of conscience has called this war what it is, a massacre of innocent people. And it's clear to so many when the question is the divide is between barbarism and civilization, who is on what side? So who are the savages that they're talking about? The ones who starve a civilian population as a weapon of war? Or the ones who we see sharing what small amounts of food they have with their neighbor? Who is the savage? The ones who kill babies, or the ones who care for the babies whose parents have been killed, that they have no blood relations to? The ones who bomb hospitals, or the ones who refuse to leave their patients despite the danger to their own lives? Who is civilized? The ones who destroy homes, or the ones who, after rescuers come and they're under the rubble, they say, "Don't save me first. Go first to my mother, my brother, my grandfather, then you can come back for me." The ones who target journalists, or the ones who risk their lives to tell the truth. Gaza has been called the most dangerous place on earth for a journalist. People with press vests are not only not avoided, but they're targeted. The ones who strip and torture and rape prisoners, or the ones who maintain their dignity even in captivity. The ones who dig up graves, or the ones who mourn their dead with pious serenity. The ones who pulverize houses of God, making no differentiation between churches and mosques. Or the ones who never stop praising him. Is it the ones who hate, or the ones who hope? Because the Palestinian people, my brothers and sisters, make no mistake, have won the one battle that Israel and its supporters are absolutely desperate to lead. And that is the battle for hearts and minds. A battle that cannot be won with bombs or tanks, or even endless financial resources poured into media manipulation and propaganda. It can only be won with beautiful character and courage. And this is the promise of Allah. We are promised that when we seek to please him, he will make the whole world admire us. And this is the sunnah of Allah that we are witnessing, where you have hundreds of millions of dollars that we know about poured into media manipulation, from mainstream media to social media. Social media is not a free, space. As anyone who's on any meta platform will tell you, we are censored, we are shadow banned. And despite that, the Palestinian cause has won this battle for hearts and minds globally. But as one Palestinian mother told a friend who called her, she's in Gaza, and her friend said to her, be patient, you're being tested. The woman responded, we have already passed our test. It is you who is now being tested. Because it is us who are being tested with this question: what did we do when we saw this level of dhulm? How did we respond? This is a test for every single one of us. So if you are here today, it means you care. And it means you took time out of your busy lives to do something for your brothers and sisters in Gaza. You could have stayed home and binge watched Netflix, but you didn't. You got in the car, you fought traffic, you found a place to park, and you got here. And what that also means is that Allah wants good for you. It means that he put you here because he wants good for you, because he wants you to do good, to serve him. When Allah gives us the opportunity to serve him, it is a favor upon us. But if we are honest with ourselves, and I'm the first to admit it, we are all struggling and grieving to keep going in this long, drawn-out, heart-wrenching genocide. We are struggling to stay hopeful. I think this is the biggest challenge we are facing. There is a deficit now in hope. We feel deflated. We feel overwhelmed. We feel disappointed in Muslim leadership, in Arab leadership, in democratic leadership. Thank you. We are heartbroken, and it's hard to keep going. So what I often do is I want to give the talk that I need to hear. And the one I need to hear is one of how do I stay hopeful in the face of so much brutality. I first want to remind myself first and you that we cannot fall into despair, because this is exactly what our oppressors want. It is for us to surrender to hopelessness. Iblis, the name of shaitan, as we all know, comes from the same root as the word for despair. We are not people of despair. We are people of hope. How do we keep our hearts hopeful despite feeling so overwhelmed? So some reflections on this question. The first thing to keep in mind is we have to focus on the Creator, not the calamity. Hope is about courage. Now, one beautiful story that illustrates this idea is in Surah Al-Baqarah. It's the story of a small brigade, not very well trained, certainly not very well equipped, that was marching to go meet Goliath, a giant, and his army. Huge, huge army. And within this group, there were two subgroups. There were two almost like factions. Not a very large group, but yet there were two factions that had different points of view, different focal points as they marched to meet this overwhelming opponent. One group said, we are powerless. We have no strength. We have no power against Goliath and his army. They were looking at the calamity. That was their focus, the facts on the ground. They have more men, way more soldiers. They have a giant. We are a small group. We have bad training. Our weapons are meager. So they were focused on the calamity and they lost their hope. They lost their strength. But there was a second group who knew the same facts on the ground. They did not think there was going to be a backup army. They did not think they had better weapons than they had. They didn't know, they knew how to count. It wasn't that they thought they were a bigger group than they were. That wasn't what differentiated them from their colleagues who were losing hope. Their distinguishing factor was that they knew that they would meet their Lord. That is how they were described. They knew that they would meet their Lord. So their focal point, their focus, their intellectual horizon was not the giant and his army, but was the creator of the giant and his army. And so that giant and his army were dwarfed in their eyes. Not that they were made big, but Allah's might was made big in their eyes. And they said, how often has a small group overtaken a large group with the permission of Allah? And indeed, Allah is with as-sabirin, and they say, use the word as-sabirin. Indeed, Allah is with what we would translate often as the patient. Patience isn't passively waiting. They were the group that wanted to keep marching, but they were calling themselves, they were identifying themselves as the ones with sabr. Sabr also means perseverance, not giving up, not losing hope, even when it feels overwhelming. So hope sounds like courage. Patience is movement. We need to keep our sabr, to keep our hope. Perseverance is patience made visible. So focus on the Creator, not the calamity, to stay hopeful. The second piece of advice to myself and to you is know that hardships aren't just tests. They are also often protections. So keeping hope is about insight. It's about seeing things, not just their appearance on the surface, but their spiritual reality behind what is apparent to everyone else. Seeing the will of Allah behind the apparent events in front of us. So we know that in the Quran we are told, Yusuf alayhi salam, who was a prophet of God, the son of a prophet, someone so special, and yet he was thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit. Now, I think that oftentimes we read stories in general in the Quran, and we just gloss over them. We don't take the time to think, how would I feel if I were in their place in these circumstances? Being imprisoned for a crime you didn't commit is one of the worst calamities that a human being can endure. It's something that makes people literally lose their minds. And not only was the injustice as awful as it was that he was thrown in prison for a crime he didn't commit, it was a crime of honor, and it was a crime his accusers, the ones who put him in prison, knew he didn't commit. So the injustice was double. And yet, how was this described in the Quran as a protection for him? He asked Allah for protection from the treachery of those in the palace, the women in the palace, and the response was prison. That's your protection. So sometimes the worst calamity in the eyes of anyone who's observing, and in our eyes at the time, sometimes it can actually be a protection. So staying hopeful is about insight. The third thing that can help us stay hopeful is that we let the injustice that we see around us inspire action and deepen our conviction in the day when the wrongs are made right. The Quran points to the balance. It encourages us to reflect on the creation of the universe and how everything is created in balance. In science class, we learned that all systems tend toward equilibrium. Balance is the way of nature, the way of creation. It's the sunnah of Allah. But yet we see in human affairs zero balance, total imbalance, total injustice. So it says to us, it would be illogical for there not to be a day where everything is made balanced. There must be a day of accountability. Nothing else would be logical. And so these ayahs in the Quran that we often set aside, don't want to talk about, maybe even feel uncomfortable about, that talk about the torment and punishment of the wicked, talk about the accountability of the tyrants, and we feel uncomfortable about it, or they might even bother us. Let these ayahs give you comfort. There will be a day of accountability. There is a place for the baby killers in an afterlife. Let the incomplete justice of the UN and of other toothless, powerless courts of so-called international law remind you of the day of perfect justice. Let their incapacity to do anything remind you of the day of perfect justice, where the judge and the King of Kings will say, to whom belongs dominion today? لمن الملك اليوم? To God, the one, the all-powerful. لله الواحد القهار. And on that day, rest assured, his verdict will be enforced. So let this time of so much injustice keep you hopeful and deepen your conviction in the akhirah. Source your hope, my sisters and brothers, in God's might, not your means, but still do the work. Still do the work. Hope is about action and reliance. The most powerful man in the world today, believe it or not, is President Joe Biden. That's a fact, a political fact. And yet, he was stripped of his power against his will, where he was forced by his own party not to run for president. How? Because he did poorly in one debate? Is that what we're supposed to believe? The answer is because 600,000 people, without any real resources or money, organized to vote in the uncommitted campaign in swing states. And that gave a very big signal, a very loud warning sign to his party that said, this man has to go. So the debate and his so-called performance in the debate was an excuse and the last straw. And yet these people who organized were told this is not going to do anything. 600,000 people is not that many people. But they had the faith and the inspiration to do what they could do, and they changed the course of history. This is something we're witnessing right now. Never underestimate any act, no matter how small, in the service of justice. Keep acting. Keep doing anything you can. And Allah will take those small pebbles, those small grains of sand that we're throwing at an army, and will make the victory from those tiny things. But we have to do our part. So hope is about remaining action-oriented and relying on Allah, because we know that it is His might and not our means that will bring about the solution. And along with that, we have to elevate our assumption of Allah to stay hopeful. Who is in control? Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Allah promises us He is as we think of Him. So when Hajar was told that she was going to be left alone in the desert with her child, with nothing around her, she simply asked one question: is this what your Lord commanded you to do? That was her one and only question. And when the answer was from Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, essentially without answering, she knew the answer was yes, she said, okay, He will not leave us. He will not allow us to be destroyed. That was her sense of good opinion of Allah. Despite the facts on the ground, she believed He would take care of her. And that is exactly what happened. And how do we maintain this good opinion of Allah? The answer comes in a very strange messenger, or a very strange place, maybe, perhaps, because the story I'm going to tell you might surprise you. I was doing a podcast one time. I was being interviewed by a Christian pastor with a very large following and a huge congregation in Texas. And this is an evangelical Christian. And he had spent a lot of time with Muslims in Muslim countries, Muslim communities. And so at the end of the interview, he asked me, do you have a question? Do you have a question for me? As sort of the way to close out the conversation. I said, yes, I have a question for you. And I wanted his listeners to hear what he was going to say. I said, you've been around Muslims for a long time. You've spent a lot of time in our communities around the world and here in America. What is the thing you admire most about us? And I wanted his listeners to hear him say whatever he was going to say. And I was hoping he would say something. And he said, oh, that's easy. It's your prayer life. You pray 5 times a day. You pray in congregation. It keeps you strong. It keeps you hard to convert. Those are his words, not mine. So our salah is what keeps us strong. I agree with him 100%. That was his observation. Our salah is our superpower, our secret weapon. The way we stay strong in our faith, the way we keep ourselves hard to convert by any religion, by any way of life, not just evangelical Christianity, is to stay strong in our salah and to elevate our opinion of Allah. And I'll end with this. Hope is about what we're doing right now, connection and community, and service. In Surah Al-Duha, Allah was revealing a surah to Rasulullah alayhi salatu salam in a time of incredible emotional heartache for the Prophet of God alayhi salatu salam. It was his emotional midnight, and Surah Al-Duha was daybreak to relieve that heartache. And part of the prescription of Surah Al-Duha is to serve the most vulnerable. So this is how we stay strong, we stay hopeful, is we serve those who need our help most. So, my sisters and brothers, God's victory does not need me and you. We need to be a part of this opening for our own souls. The question is, do you want to be a part of that opening? Or do you want to be a bystander? أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. السلام عليكم.